Hello and welcome to episode 88 of Mark Talks About His Stuff. It is Tuesday, 27th of April 2021, and that means that 29 years ago today was my very first Cure show. It also means that 41 years ago today, The Cure played in Canterbury, which is not too far away from where I live. I didn't go to the show in Canterbury because I was less than 10 years old and I was far more interested in The Empire Strikes Back and Star Trek than I was in The Cure. No doubt if I'd gone to that show, I would have spent the whole time pissing and moaning about how it was awful and it was too loud and the lights were too bright and I just wanted to go home. But instead of that, today I'm going to talk about U2's, I think it's 14th album, Songs of Innocence, which was released in October 2014 without any real fanfare and nobody knew that it was coming. Yes, this is the infamous iTunes album that appeared in your iTunes library to something like 700 million people and caused U2 to be the butt of endless jokes about free music forever. There's an awful lot to talk about in this episode about this album, so much so that I've made some notes and stuck them on a computer screen in case I forget any. But what I'm going to try and do is to talk chronologically through the events before, up to, during and after the album to try and give you a context around the record and the story behind its existence. The first kind of thing which really kind of indicated that the band were working on any new material was the release of this, Ordinary Love, the Record Store Day release from 2013 as a 10-inch single that has a new U2 song called Ordinary Love on it, backed with an acoustic version of Breathe called the Mandela version. Breathe went through a multitude of different versions during recording for the No Line on the Horizon album. One set of lyrics was geared around the life of Nelson Mandela. That version wasn't used on the final album, but instead the band went in and re-recorded it at Electric Lady Studios in New York, presumably after the album sessions, and cut an acoustic version for the B-sides. The A-side track, Ordinary Love, brand new U2 song. I think it's absolutely great. First fruits from the album, which nobody knew existed at that point. So Ordinary Love was, I think, a limited 10-inch, maybe 10,000 or so copies, only released in America, hence my copy has import on it there. Cost me more than I wanted to pay, but less than I was prepared to pay, primarily because if I pay what I think all my records are worth, I only buy good stuff. I'll spend hundreds of pounds on just one album, but instead I will just buy hundreds of albums, or tens of pounds, if that makes any sense. The rest of 2013 for the band was quiet and loud at the same time. They recorded a cover version of a song called This Is by an Irish band called Aslan, who I do not know, but it's a fantastic recording and they uploaded it on YouTube, and I can tell it's not live, by the way, but it's them miming to a studio recording that they've made separately, because there are more guitars than there are guitars in the video. It's a great cover version, classic B-side material, really should have been on a single, but as we'll see is that Ordinary Love is in fact the only physical single which the band released between I Know I'll Go Crazy If I Go Crazy Tonight and Red Hill Mining Town in 2017. So they went 8 years by releasing just one 10-inch single, which means the normal episodes I would show up lots of B-sides and weird mixes and all that stuff, but the band took a slightly different approach for the album. But the first approach, the first indication that I think things were going to change for U2 was the announcement in November 2013 that the band's manager, Paul McGuinness, had decided to retire from working with U2. And Paul McGuinness was 64, and he felt that that was a musically appropriate age at which to move on to his other interests. He sold the interest in principal management to Live Nation. U2 selected Guy Oseary to be their new manager. And I have to be fairly open about this. I'm not a fan of Guy Oseary's management style. He manages U2 and Madonna until May 27th, 2020. He also managed a company called Maverick Management, I got the impression that he was spreading himself very, very thinly indeed, and he wasn't giving U2 the time and attention that they deserved. And instead of being maybe an equal partner in the management, his role as a manager was more to enable the band as opposed to act maybe as a barometer for them and to push back. I get the feeling at this point that I think some of U2's decisions, I think, have been pushed out a little bit further than the band's core nucleus of the four members, and I think some bad decision making has taken place since Guy Oseary became the band's manager. But now is not the time to go into that in a huge amount of detail. Suffice to say, I think if you're managing U2, then you should be managing U2. You shouldn't be managing a portfolio of businesses and artists. You can't manage U2 and Madonna and Maverick Management and give them all the time that they deserve. U2, like Madonna, is a multi-million-pound industry that in touring years employs hundreds of people. You can't be managing 3 or 4 organisations of that size and give them the time and money and effort that they deserve. I also think that since Guy Oseary became U2's manager, that Guy Oseary's role has been in the music business as opposed to being in the U2 business. And Paul McGuinness's approach, I think, was always very, very clearly in the U2 business as opposed to being in the music business, and was trying to think about, well, what is the best route for my band? You know, and having grown up with the band since their very, very early years in Dublin, which is chronicled in this book, North Side Story, which I'll detail in a moment, Paul McGuinness grew up and grew old with the band, and their successes were his successes and vice versa, whereas Guy Oseary's successes have not been exclusively in the world of U2, and I think he hasn't pushed back against some of the decision making. Some of his decision making hasn't been perhaps as good as it could have been, and he spread himself too thinly, which is a nice way of saying U2 are a bloody big deal and they deserve a full-time manager who is fully committed to the band and nobody else. Now, with all that to one side, and I'll mention that as we kind of go along, U2's fan club often released what they call fan club gifts, where you subscribe to the fan club and you get something in return for it, a physical product normally. Sometimes it's a CD, sometimes it's a DVD, sometimes it's a live album from 1980, sometimes it's lithographs, which obviously you're going to have to go, well, I'm going to have to buy more space now to put the lithographs up. Occasionally, and on one occasion, I think 2013, maybe 2014, it was this book, North Side Story, U2 in Dublin, 1978 to 1983. It's effectively a compilation of hot press articles, hot press being the leading Irish music publication, building on the previously published U2 portfolio from 1985, which was a hot press magazine publication as well. But effectively, it kind of worked as an introduction to the band's early years. And it also came with this poster, which called itself North and South of the River, wandering in U2's Dublin. Effectively, if you go to Dublin and you want to visit U2's homeland, then this poster here will provide you a map of Dublin City with some details of various locations of interest and what they're necessarily their meanings are. So, for example, here's Croker Park, where U2 have played live at many, many stadiums. Here is, I think this is probably Temple Bar, where a lot of recording and live shows took place. Way over here somewhere is, the band's headquarters and their childhood homes and so on and so forth. This was the first recognition, I think, that the bands were looking backwards, and at the time it kind of felt a little bit like I wasn't quite sure exactly what the purpose of this was, that they clearly had nothing worthwhile to put in it, so maybe they were just going to give us a history book, but effectively this is actually, in retrospect, the nearest thing to an official potted history of U2's early years. And also adds, by the way, as a very kind of handy and useful guide to the Songs of Innocence album, which comes up shortly. There's a lot of information that's in here, which you can also draw on the Songs of Innocence album. So, early 2014, the band released a single for the charity Red. That single was only available as a paid download. It has had a physical release, but it hasn't been listed on any of the U2 albums. In fact, it exists as the final secret hidden bonus track on the deluxe CD version of Songs of Innocence. That song is called Innocence, and sorry, not Innocence, Invisible. and it is a very, very, very meaningful U2 song for me. It's probably the song which, to me at least, has the most meaning in terms of my personal life than any of their most recent songs. The song is, I think, allegedly written from the point of view or a survivor of abuse, and how they have begun to reclaim their own name and their own identity as opposed to being just a victim. Now, I'm not going to talk about terrible things that happened to me in the past which you're not interested in. Instead, I'm going to talk about the lyrics that we've got for the song. Now the song's a very clear, very strong song around identity. And you know, the lyrics are something I said are things like, you know, when you see me, I'm no. It's just, hang on a second. I'm going to go and pause this, and I'm going to bring up the essay that I wrote about the song, which I accidentally forgot to load like a twit. Back soon. Thanks for that. So I found the writing that I did about the song Invisible, and I'm just going to pick out a couple of key lyrics that we've got in the song Invisible and why they have a meaning to me. It's one of the most important U2 songs that there is. So the opening lines are, "It's like the room just cleared of smoke. I didn't even want the heart you broke. It's yours to keep. You might need one." Now, if you've ever been broken-hearted, that lyric really, really resonates, you know. I mean, certainly I've had my heart broken. I didn't want to have a heart at that point, and certainly that person who did that thing to me, I kind of think that maybe they could have done with a little bit more compassion. The next line is around, "I finally found my real name. I won't be me when you see me again. No, I won't be my father's son." And again, that's a very important lyric to me as well. I've got a difficult relationship with my father, which is often absent. I have found that in the hopes and expectations that I would have had for a father, that my father didn't meet those, and I didn't think I was being outlandish in what I was hoping for. And also there's that concept of the sins of the father, the idea that, you know, you're responsible for the actions of people in your family that aren't you. You know, you've got the ability as you grow up and you grow old to define yourself and not to be seen purely as, you know, the son of somebody or the daughter of somebody, or that relationship, which is actually something that's completely arbitrary that you've got no control over. And to put the context around the song, when the song came out, I was 40. I'd hit that age, and there's a cliche about having a midlife crisis when you hit 40. I felt invisible. I felt unappreciated by the world. I'd had a really rough ride career-wise, which wasn't my fault, to be honest. Wasn't my doing. And I'd had a number of bad job experiences, and I kind of felt that maybe, although I didn't want it to be the case, I had a fear that maybe my best days were behind me, and it was all downhill from there. You know, work-wise, I'd been passed over for promotion in favour of other people who told the boss what they wanted to hear and not what they necessarily needed to hear. So I think there'd been a couple of times I'd applied for jobs and I hadn't been successful, and I couldn't understand how the person who'd been successful, why they'd chosen him. And it was a him, in a number of occasions, apart from perhaps I would have been more, I would have told more truth than that person. I'd gone through a catastrophic health run, actually. So when that song came out, I was bedridden with double pneumonia in both lungs. So I was effectively drowning in my own lungs, and it was the kind of pneumonia that was very, very severe. The type of stuff that in the 1930s, if I'd have had it, you know, 30% of the people that would have had it in 1930 would have died. Because the medicine wouldn't have been, you know, the medical treatment hadn't advanced enough to be able to solve it. And I was off work for 6 weeks. I lost an awful lot of weight, and I felt like my own body was trying to kill me. My partner had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis as well, around about the same time. And what it generally felt like is that, you know, everything was going wrong. It was really, really difficult. I was the unhappiest that I'd been since the year 2000. You know, I felt invisible, I felt overlooked, I felt that my health was starting to fall to bits, I was capable of much more, and the world hadn't necessarily given me a chance to try that. Now my life's changed completely since then. My health is much better, my career is much better, my happiness in myself is much better. But this song gave me a hope, Invisible. And you know, as human beings, there's a lot of cruelty in the world, and there is nothing probably crueler than one human being and their behaviour to another one. And you know, things like ideas, hopes, dreams, the way and consideration that you should treat other people are sometimes treated as meaningless, or perhaps, if you're a psychopath, actually things like rules, convention, compassion, honesty, truth, they're concepts which are both burdens other people have to carry that you don't have, and that other people can be objects that can be manipulated and misused for profit, or objectified as monsters and you know, treated disdainfully. And then there's a lyric inside Invisible where Bono sings, "I'm more than you know, I'm more than you see here. You don't see me, but you will. I am not invisible." And really, I think what that lyric really cut through a lot of things is, I wasn't giving up. Even if the world felt like it had given up on me, even if my body felt like it was giving up on me, I was not giving up. I was still here. I was still fighting. I am here. And, you know, it reminded me a lot, actually, of an ancient episode of the Twilight Zone TV series, which is called To See the Invisible Man. And in To See the Invisible Man, which had a really formative effect upon me when I was about 13, there was a punishment where you were effectively regarded as invisible from the world for a year. So you know, people were not allowed to talk to you. You weren't allowed to seek medical help. You know, you could go to a shop and shoplift whatever you liked, because you were invisible. But also, you couldn't talk to people. You couldn't get help from people. You couldn't get prescriptions, for example. Your financial transactions didn't happen because you ceased to exist. And what I'd felt at the time that the song came out is that I was invisible. I was invisible to people. I was invisible to employers. I was invisible in a romantic sense. And I ceased to exist as a matter of concern to certain people who treated me as somewhat disposable in terms of both friendships, which had become abusive and toxic, and in terms of a couple of employment environments where things have been really, really difficult for me. So, but I had something that nobody else did. I had control over my reactions and control over who I was. And even a line as basic, "I won't be me when you see me again," was loaded with a potency around freedom to define our own identity, to no longer be our father's son, to be someone completely different. So it was a cry of liberation and freedom, and it was a rejection of the things which people had put upon us, which we hadn't chosen for. And to me, it's the sound of a person breaking free from a situation and being visible, defining themselves on their own terms, saying, "This is me, I exist, I am someone." And that's why, you know, Invisible gave me the courage to be me at times where it was very, very difficult. Now, I've been very, very lucky during the course of my life. You know, I've had incredible experiences with incredible people, and I don't feel now the way that I did when the song came out. But that song really is a song to me that seems to capture up all the feelings that go around almost a midlife crisis. And it became a very important song to me, Invisible, and it was played live a number of times by the band, but it wasn't on the album, presumably something to do contractually with the status of the charity. And to me, that's a criminal shame, because Invisible is, to me, as good a song in U2's canon as Vertigo or Beautiful Day or The Fly or One. It's just a fantastic song that really needs to be given more recognition. And if hearing me talk about it passionately for the past 8 minutes hasn't convinced you of that, please just if you like U2 and you don't know the song, please listen to it, and you may get it and you may not. But the Songs of Innocence was not on, did not feature Invisible. So Songs of Innocence, as I've said before, is the only U2 album that doesn't have a single, apart from no, it doesn't have a single on it at all. It doesn't have a single commercially released single on there. It's got a number of promotional singles, which are available as CDRs and videos, but there was no single that was released from Songs of Innocence as a commercial package, as an ownable, buyable thing. Songs of Innocence is a completely self-contained entity that has no associated singles or baggage with it. The whole thing is on here. And that's I think a combination of factors. One of which is that the physical single, the CD single, the 12-inch single, is almost dead, and was almost dead when it came out. The other one is the concept of physical media itself was starting to unravel. So the album was first released on iTunes, and there were 700 million. It was added to 700 million iTunes accounts as a free new U2 album. And I think that was a very sly and very, very clever commercial move. As you can see, the sales from previous albums had dipped completely. So How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb was something like 5 million. I think No Line on the Horizon ended up at something like 1.9 million. And the idea was actually, instead of constantly playing a game which you might not be successful at, that is selling a lot of CDs, the idea was actually you just take yourself out of the game completely, and you think about, well, what you're trying to do. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to communicate to people through the medium of music. Prince did a very similar thing in 2007 when he released the album Planet Earth, shrink wrapped to a UK newspaper, and in 2010 when he released the album 2010, that was again shrink wrapped to the front of a newspaper as a CD. So you bought a newspaper, you got a new Prince album. And this was just one step beyond that, which is instead of you just had a U2 album appear free in your iTunes account. So concepts like sales, commerce, all that stuff became frozen. It kind of got sidelined to one side. And the thing that really mattered was that you had an album that you could listen to. And U2 presumably made the decision to sell the album to iTunes for an amount of money, and iTunes exclusively had the right to distribute the album free of charge for a certain period of time. And the day that the album was released, nobody was expecting to wake up the next day and to get a free U2 album from iTunes. Just nobody had a clue about it. We thought, well, maybe they'll do an updated U2 iPod or something. But no, they did a whole U2 album free in your iTunes. And yes, I know many of you didn't ask for it, and many of you would like to take the piss out of U2 about that. I completely understand that. But U2 released an album for free, which was, in all things considered, quite a ballsy move, and it certainly took them out of the need for the commercial constraints around sales and promotion that perhaps would previously have existed. And what this means is that the album is really, really strong, but it's an album as an experience. It's not an album made out of individual songs. Now, there were 3 physical vinyl releases for it. The first one was a single 11-track LP in a plain white sleeve with a sticker. There are about 300 copies of that were pressed, and they were sold at independent stores like Amoeba, and some in New York as well, and each store had maybe 20-30 copies. Those sold out very, very quickly. They're still staggeringly expensive to buy, but I think the reason they pressed those 300 was so that the band could say, when awards time came, is that yes, we had a physical release of the album in the stores on a certain date, presumably to allow validity for them to be included in, I don't know, whatever the Rolling Stone Awards are for that year, or the Emmys, or the Grammys, or the whatevers, or the Tonys, or the Bobs, or whatever the awards are called. But what it really did is it created a huge rarity, which shouldn't have happened, actually, because if you can press 300 copies of an LP, you can press 3,000 copies of an LP. You can press 10,000 copies of an LP, and U2 aren't short of cash. So instead they just created a pointlessly limited release, which I think was more ego than any actual proper release. The next version of the album that came out, by the way, was released a few weeks later. It came out in a physical form as a double CD here, and in another physical form as a double LP. And just to go through the concept, this is actually not a double album as such. It's actually the standard 11-track album pressed on 3 sides plus an extra bonus track on the 4th disc. It's gorgeously packaged, by the way, I should say, and the cover of the album, it was deliberately chosen to kind of tie into the themes of the album. So the album is called Songs of Innocence, and if you look at the sleeve of the album there, you can see that it's actually called Songs of Innocence. There's space between the sun and the guns and Guinness is a technical phrase there, and it's, you know, it's deliberate. This is a song, and this album is a series of songs about innocence, about U2 looking back at their childhood and contextualizing it as adults and going, well, how have we got here? What does that mean? What does that journey take us on? Where have we been, and how? And sometimes you can't know where you are unless you know how you've got there. And this is alongside the book North Side Story, which I've just put over there. It's U2 really contextualizing their life as adults, looking at their childhood adventures. There are 11 songs on the album, and almost every song on the album is about their childhood or their first relationships, their first loves. The album opens with The Miracle of Joey Ramone, which is a really important song, and it lends itself to the entire theme of the album, which is around, you know, it opens up the lyric for The Miracle of Joey Ramone, which is that, you know, your voice was all I heard, I was shaking from a storm in me. I wanted to be the melody above the noise and above the hurt. And I woke up at the moment when the miracle occurred, and I heard a song that made some sense out of the world. Everything I ever lost now has been returned in the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. And, you know, that song is very, very clearly, it's about when U2 saw the Ramones in Dublin in around about 1977. And a bunch of childhood pals snuck in to see the Ramones, and it changed their view of the world. You know, the Ramones was a light bulb that illuminated the rest of their lives for them, and they saw in music an ability and a way to make sense of the world. And it's a love song to the songs of your youth, the songs that you loved when you were growing up. You know, everybody that's ever fallen in love with a band or a song has got a song that has the same effect upon them that the Ramones had upon U2. And for that, the Ramones are probably very, very sorry indeed. But the second track on the album is Every Breaking Wave, which they played on the 2010 360 tour with a different arrangement. And again, that's a beautiful song, but it's one where I think Bono sings probably the best he's ever sung. Actually, it's got a lyric in it, like all of them. It goes, you know, every breaking wave on the shore tells the next one there'll be one more, and every gambler knows that to lose is what you're really here for. And it's a song around love and relationships, and every dog on the street knows that we're in love with defeat, and we're ready to be swept off our feet and stop chasing every breaking wave. It's a song around a search for some kind of meaning, some kind of narrative, some kind of sense in the world around you. And that relationship, you know, Bono's been with his partner Ali since, you know, childhood, as has Larry. And it's around having a lifelong relationship and companionship through which everything else makes sense in a prism. And there's also, by the way, the fourth song on it is Song for Someone, which is a song that never gets anywhere near enough, I think, love and attention in the fan base. To me, it's a song about losing your virginity. The stage show version of the song, when they played it live, has pictures of a recreation of Bono's childhood bedroom with posters for the Clash and Kraftwerk and you know, other probably Patti Smith's horses in the background. But there's a lyric in that where he sings, I was told that it wouldn't hurt the first time, and I don't know how these cuts heal, but in you I found a rhyme. Now, I'm going to guess that most of you have lost your virginity, and whether it hurts or whether it doesn't hurt, you know, there's an element of the body physically being put through its paces, you know, doing something it's not done before, stretching muscles which haven't been stretched, and then, you know, being told that you'd feel nothing the first time. You know, I was told that when I lost my virginity, it would, I don't know, be like clicking your fingers or something. It would be easy, and but what it was actually was kind of weird and unusual and new and strange. And this song to me really feels like it's about falling in love, losing virginity, all those first time experiences that you would have, and it's a song for someone. And it's got a beautiful melody around it. It's one of the best U2 songs of later years. Now, side 2 of the album opens with what I think should be the opening song of the album, which is Iris, Hold Me Close. Iris is a perfect name for this song. Iris is the name of Bono's mother. And this song was inspired by the only existing film footage of her that exists, where she was wearing a lemon dress, which is also actually the used for the lyric of Lemon. And the whole song really seems to me to be around, the relationship that people have with their mothers. Now, as I mentioned previously, Salman Rushdie has a theory around premature death awareness syndrome, which is that some artists are compelled to create because their parents have died whilst they've been at a very young age, and they've been spurred by the sudden realisation of mortality. If you want to look at a driven artist, often their mother has died young. So Elvis Costello, as I understand it, Bono, for example, those type of people, they're driven by an urge to leave a mark on the world because they know how fragile life is. My mother died when I was quite young, and maybe that's made me more ambitious than I would otherwise have been. And I'm very close to approaching the age that she was when she died. So, I'm trying to think, well, I need to make sure that the way that I live my life is one in which I can feel is the right way in which to live. Now, Iris, of course, also is the name of one of the components of the eye. It's the way that light gets into the brain. And that ties in with the thing that we've got in The Miracle of Joey Ramone about a light bulb going off when you hear a song, and the stage show that goes with it. There's an incredible verse where Bono sings, "You took me by the hand, I thought that I was leading you, but it was you made me your man machine. I dream where you are. Iris standing in the hall, she tells me I can do it all. Iris wakes to my nightmares, don't feel the world, it isn't there. She says that I will be the death of her, but it was not me." And my mum used to say to me that I'd be the death of her. It was not me. No doubt Bono's mum said to him, "You'll be the death of me," and it was not him. And there's that sudden moment where actually I'm kind of thinking about Bono as a little boy thinking about the mother that he never got to grow old. And that's something that really resonates with me as a song, and every time I hear that song I think about that, and it's a really important, powerful thing, is to be able to recognise how you got to being who you are from where you've come from. And yes, I am having feelings at the moment around that. So it's a really, really good LP. Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. When we get into the next couple of songs, there's two songs together at the end of side 2 of the album, probably about songs, I think probably 7 and 8, which are Raised by Wolves and Cedarwood Road. Raised by Wolves is around a terrorist bombing. I think it was the Dunblane bombing in 1974, but I could be wrong. And Cedarwood Road is about the road where Bono grew up. He grew up in the little bedroom in 10 Cedarwood Road, and on tour they sold a t-shirt with a picture of his childhood home on the front. This is it. And if you are there and you're a U2 fan, you will know, and if you aren't, it won't mean anything to you. But when we went to see U2 in Dublin on the Innocence and Experience tour, the first thing I did is I got off the plane, I got on a bus, and I took the bus to Cedarwood Road. I wanted to walk those streets. And then to be able to go and see the man singing about his childhood home, knowing that I'd been to that childhood home a few hours before, was a pretty strange experience, to put it all in a context, especially with the meaning that the album has around growing up and the relationship that he has with his mother. Side 3 of the album has Sleep Like a Baby Tonight and This Is Where You Reach Me Now. And I think it's fair to say Sleep Like a Baby Tonight is not the best song that U2 have ever released. And that is all I will say on the matter. The last song on the album itself properly is The Troubles, which perhaps you could say is a little bit arrogant to write a song about the troubles, and then also to talk about the troubles inside personal relationships, and to draw a comparison between your personal relationships and the the troubles that you had and the terrorist activity that you've got. Now this is I think most versions of the album, the most commonly available version is this double 12-inch white vinyl. And the image that you've got up on here, by the way, is a tattoo that Larry has on his arm, which you can see on the cover of the LP. And on the cover of the LP, he is holding his now adult son in a kind of protective fashion, but also at the same point being comforted by it. It's a really strong image. I don't think it's necessarily the right image for the album cover. And I think I'll talk through what I think the right image for the album cover might be later on. But there's a photograph of the four fathers of the members of U2 holding their instruments for an Anton Corbijn photo session in 1999 that I think is much better. That would have worked as an LP cover, but that is a powerful image for the album cover. And I've placed the sticker appropriately over the nipples because I'm, of course, a horrendous prude. The last track on the vinyl edition that is most commonly known, side 4, is a song called The Crystal Ballroom. And The Crystal Ballroom is an adaptation of a song that they'd wrote previously, but it's based around the idea of, people, when Bono's parents met, I think they met at a ballroom at a dance, and they kind of, our eyes met over a crowded dance floor to the sound of Billy Fury or whatever. And obviously both of those people are now dead. So the lyric is around the ghosts of love that haunt this place, and it's around how every room that was ever a disco or a nightclub or a pub, somebody fell in love in each one of those rooms, and lives were changed and children were born as a result of that. And it's powerful, heavy stuff to think about. Now, I think Songs of Innocence is a much, much better album in retrospect. At the time it came out, I was not wowed by the album. I absolutely wasn't. I think maybe the band realised that big singles weren't quite where they were, and they decided to avoid that and just go straight for an album and straight for some touring. And I think that was brave, but what it meant was the album itself has no single standout track. Nobody thinks about, well, what's the best song of Songs of Innocence? And everyone's got a different one, because there's not one instant killer hit like Beautiful Day or Elevation or Vertigo. Maybe not Get On Your Boots, but there's no one song that everyone goes, that's the classic. And people love Song for Someone or Cedarwood Road or Raised by Wolves. It's an album made out of very, very strong songs that all fit well together and talk well with each other, as opposed to an album of some hit singles and some rubbish songs in it as well. But I think it took too long to be made. So it took 5 years and 8 months, which is only 46 days shorter than the length of the Second World War. So when the previous album came out, No Line on the Horizon, for example, in the gap between No Line on the Horizon and Songs of Innocence, I became a parent for the second time. My child grew up and started school before the band released this album. That's too long for an album to be made. Now, obviously, Kraftwerk are still going 17 years, 18 years between albums. Sisters of Mercy are something like 30 years, 32 years between albums. That's not really the point. For a band like U2, 5 3/4 years is too long a gap. And I think the band suffered a little bit for it. It's also not a well-sequenced album. I think that some of the sequencing on it is more lyrical as opposed to sonical, and the album experience feels frustratingly uneven at certain points. Iris seems like an obvious choice for the first song on the album, and then The Miracle of Joey Ramone, but it isn't. And a couple of the songs, Sleep Like a Baby and This Is Where You Reach Me Now, are pretty much B-side stuff, to be honest. And some of the songs which the band had written, which they played live, weren't on the album. So Mercy, North Star, Boy Falls from the Sky, Glastonbury, which was heavily rewritten and became Volcano, are not on there. And it baffles me why those songs aren't available as B-sides or extra tracks. U2 are still chasing being relevant. They're still chasing being successful and being big, and successful mass communication, which is inherent in their very name. And they decided to bypass the idea of hit singles and big CD sales by going straight to releasing this album to iTunes, and then making sure that 700 million people have access to it if that's what they want to have. It's a bold move, but it's not necessarily the right one, and it's been very controversial. The other thing I think I will say about the album is that there are elements where the band are singing about their own lives, and for them a day at work is walking on stage in front of a football stadium. You take a private plane to work and you have several houses. It's a world that's very, very far removed from the world that almost everybody who likes U2 lives and operates in. And I think there's an element of it sometimes being occasionally alienating. So a song like California, for example, and where the lyrics are very clearly about travelling to California as if it's something that's very obvious and normal and straightforward. Well, it might be if you're someone like Bono or you live in California, but for people like me, California is a place that I have never visited, and it's a place that I may never yet get to visit. So to me, you might as well sing a song about Mars or Jupiter or Saturn or Neptune or Pluto, because I remember when Pluto was still a planet, although Pluto, by the way, is apparently smaller than the moon. I've grown to love this album. It stands up really, really well as an album, and the first time that U2 as artists decided to recontextualise and look at their own childhoods and their innocence and where they came from, and put a wrapping around that as an understanding. To quote, I can't remember who it was now, probably Baudrillard or someone who said that life can only be lived forwards but can only be understood backwards, is, you know, their childhoods now make a lot more sense as adults than they did at the time that they were living in it. My childhood still doesn't necessarily make sense as an adult looking back on it, but it was my normal, in much the same way that Bono's and Larry's, Adams and Edge's childhoods were normal to them. Although everyone has a story. If you love music, there's a song that brings you in, and for U2 it was the Ramones, and for me that song was probably It Couldn't Happen Here by Pet Shop Boys, for example. And here's the photograph, by the way, which I did mention previously, which I think would have made a really brilliant cover for the album there. Put it in black and white, put it as a black background, maybe change the suits so they don't disappear, and, you know, lo and behold, I think you've got a really strong image, or an image that should very well at least kind of sit inside the gatefold sleeve. And this is the image on the gatefold sleeve, which, by the way, was, as I understand it, taken in Westminster Tube Station in 2014. So you've probably been there. Now, the CD version of the album came with a second CD, a deluxe edition, which featured an extra 11 or so songs. So it featured, effectively, these songs were the B-sides for the singles, which were never released and just went straight onto the album. So there was Lucifer's Hands, which was, I think, was previously known as Return of the Stingray Guitar. There's the Crystal Ballroom, which I've mentioned previously. Then there's alternate versions of The Troubles and Sleep Like a Baby Tonight. And there's also an extra track called Acoustic Sessions, which probably should have been better titled, because it features 6 acoustic versions of songs off the album. So Every Breaking Wave, Cedarwood Road, probably The Miracle of Joey Ramone, Song for Someone, a few extra songs. And really the album's incomplete if you listen to the single disc version. If you're buying a version of the album, do get the double, because it's got all the bonus tracks on, it's got all the B-sides. And this is also, the CD is also has Invisible as a secret track, hidden after Sleep Like a Baby Tonight, the remix by Tashad Blake. It doesn't get any better. It's still probably the worst song on a U2 album. And that really kind of sums up my thoughts about Songs of Innocence. At the time I first heard it, I was really disappointed with the album. I don't know what I expected, but I wasn't expecting that. Over time, I've listened to it and I understand it far better now. And it's hard to believe that that album is actually 7 years old this year. I'm still pretty staggered by that, because to me it still feels like recent history. It still feels like I remember the moment when I heard that there was a new U2 album that was coming into my iTunes. And I remember I was at work in an office in Barking and Dagenham, overlooking a foggy and abandoned office block, thinking, there's a new U2 album out there and I just want to get home and hear it. Because I knew it was going to be an album, like all the U2 albums, that becomes a lifelong companion. And it's an album that's, I think, really aged very, very well. And as I've said before, the song Invisible, I think, is probably the best U2 song this decade. But they've actually released a lot of good songs this decade. And on their next album, Songs of Experience, which is a follow-up to it, which picks up a lot of the themes from Songs of Innocence, I'll kind of draw the parallels back to and from. Listening to Songs of Experience without listening to Songs of Innocence without Songs of Experience kind of feels like you're only viewing one side of a painting, like you've watched Godfather 1 but you haven't seen Godfather 2, and it's only when the two are together that it fully and completely makes sense. So that's where I'm going to wrap up with Songs of Innocence. It's an album that, to me at least, is very important and very, very good. And it's aged very well, and hopefully you didn't pay for it, but if you did, it is worth it. The next episode, when I talk about U2, I'm going to be talking about the Innocence and Experience tour of 2015, which has had some of my very favourite U2 shows in, but that is, as I've said before, a story for another time. Hopefully that's been okay. Thank you for your patience and your time listening to me talk about yet another U2 album. There's only one U2 album after this, by the way. Aren't you lucky? Firstly, I'll have got a complete series, and secondly, I won't have any more U2 albums to talk about in about 3 episodes' time. But in the meantime, this album has aged very, very well. If you like U2 and you haven't heard it for a while, stick it on again. Learn to love the songs. There are some incredible songs on there. I will post in the comments down there my preferred running order for the album, some links to some important moments in the band's history around about this period, and in the meantime, as per normal, play nice in the comments. If you've got suggestions about what you'd like to hear me talk about, you can put them in the comments as well. Any questions or anything like that, absolutely fine. In the meantime, I'm going to go downstairs. I think I've got some crisps. I'm going to enjoy eating those, and I will catch up with you at another time. So, in the words of the good old-fashioned Jerry Springer, take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you all again soon. Thank you, and bye.